So good afternoon and welcome to the third annual HSIL Subrecipient Summit. My name is Jennifer Griffiths and I'm with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I co-lead the Habitat Strategic Initiative lead team along with Julianne Kohlinger at Department of Natural Resources. And we encourage all attendees to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and affiliation. The overarching goal of this summit is to enhance the connections across the diverse and critical work we have funded with the EPA Puget Sound funds to implement the habitat implementation strategies, as well as tie that work to the breadth of other work within the Puget Sound recovery community. We want to continue to provide a space for all of us to learn and share as we work towards advancing habitat recovery in Puget Sound. On our agenda today will be welcomes from WDFW and DNR leadership, and then we'll dive into a few longer presentations, many lightning talks, and a chance for everyone to exchange ideas during our World Café. And now I'd like to welcome Nicole Tarnomsky, Restoration Division Manager at WDFW, for a few remarks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. I am Nicole Tarnomsky. I'm the Habitat Restoration Division Manager at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, which means I have the great pleasure of working with our agency teams on restoration support and funding in the Puget Sound. The HSIL team creates an amazing opportunity for new creative ideas, furthering complex projects, and addressing key issues facing Puget Sound conservation. Conservation, of course, is best accomplished when we're all doing it together, building on each other's strengths and pulling each other up when we are down. HSIL subrecipients are valued partners in all of this work. DFW is excited to work with you to leverage our roles, our authorities, and our expertise that we share together in this effort. On that note, I'm pleased to say that DFW and DNR have been able to team up and provide the one-to-one match that EPA requires for all of this funding. And that relieves the burden from all of you partners in doing this work and makes space for you to focus on it and not have to worry about that piece of the puzzle. Big topics like land use and effective public engagement, addressing future conditions, and tools for supporting our restoration work and recovery work are all important and large issues for WDFW, and we know that those are also goals that are shared in the Puget Sound community. As the management conference continues to grapple with these big topics when we work on salmon recovery and habitat recovery, projects like those that you guys will be sharing today are really great opportunities to look at solutions for the future. And of course, as Jennifer was saying, sharing hopefully will spark some great connections and connectivity between our work and build from there. We know we've seen that from the past efforts and past workshops like this. So thanks to all of you who are presenting today. I'm really excited to hear about your accomplishments, and I'm really looking forward to what is looming in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. And now I'd like to ask Tom Gorman, Aquatic Resources Division Manager at DNR, for his welcome and reflections.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. As Jennifer said, I'm Tom Gorman. I'm the Division Manager for Aquatic Resources at Department of Natural Resources. The HSIL team is housed within the Aquatic Resources Division, and DNR continues to be excited about the innovative research and piloting of projects that are accomplished through the HSIL funding. This work directly contributes to both our agency's ability to advance important initiatives and programmatic efforts. Just a couple of examples of this work that really displays, the commitment and innovation. One is the Puget Sound Conservation District's work to support small forest landowners. Another is Kitsap County's work to develop a local derelict vessel removal program. These collaborations and all of this work that we foster across different sectors, it accelerates our ability to meet restoration and protection goals. And this includes partnerships on kelp and eelgrass conservation and restoration. And these things contribute directly to DNR's management goals. We are, and again, continue to be excited to collaborate with you throughout the life of your projects. And today we're eager to learn more about how we can track and support your work. And with that, welcome again, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Tom. Julianne, would you go ahead and paste in the first part of the lineup? So we're going to kick it off with a deep dive and hopefully not catch Kelly too much by surprise. We're going to kick it off with Kelly Turner from Lummi Nation. And then Julianne's going to paste in the first 11 Lightning Talks roster in the chat so you can all check to see when you're on deck. Julianne's going to start a timer for the 13 minutes. I'll be in the upper corner, and then I'll just give you a 10 minute. At 10 minutes, I'll give you a quick warning.
Okay.
But please,
am I sharing slides then?
Nope, I've got your slides.
Okay, fantastic.
So I'll turn it over to you and just let me know how to advance. It's a pleasure to welcome you to give this first deep dive.
Wonderful. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kelly Turner. Do you have the slides showing? Am I not seeing them on my screen? Okay, great. I have them, I got the multiple screens. So I am the Watershed Restoration Manager for Lummi Nation, and I've been asked by the organizers to give an extended presentation today on a couple of the tasks that are included in our project entitled Expediting South Fork Nooksack Projects in Response to Chinook Crisis. Lummi Nation is the lead organization, and we're partnering with the Nooksack Indian tribe. And part of this project is to increase the tribe's capacity to plan reach-scale restoration projects in the South Fork Nooksack watershed to address ESA-listed South Fork early Chinook, which suffered a catastrophic mortality event in 2021 and again in 2022. This project will fund tribal staff time to plan and design projects, support FEMA Clomer-Lomer permit streamlining efforts, and develop funding strategies. It will also fund engineering consultants to develop restoration designs, conduct hydraulic modeling to support design development and permit streamlining. And so I've been asked to kind of expand on the Clomer-Lomer efforts for permit streamlining and the associated hydraulic modeling. These tasks are being led by Kitsap Co, who's the Assistant Director and Habitat Program Manager for Nooksack's Natural Resources Department. And so I worked with her to develop this presentation. So we have a lot of material to cover in, about 10 to 13 minutes, leaving some time for questions. I wanted to give some background, go into a little details on the two tasks, the floodplain permit streamlining work group, hydraulic modeling, our accomplishments to date, barriers and opportunities we've identified, and next steps. Sorry, did you already advance? You can get to the outline. I just started motoring ahead. So we're on the FEMA rescindment slide. Okay, awesome. So I wanted to start by providing some background on FEMA's rescindment of the Region 10 policy on fish enhancement structures in the floodway. So for our projects on the Nooksack River, fish enhancement structures typically describe engineered log jams or other large woody material placed in the river. So in previous years, FEMA policy allowed for some flexibility for restoration projects. Projects were effectively allowed to cause a rise if they didn't increase flood elevations by more than 0.2 feet, averaged across the floodplain during the 100-year flood. In August of 2020, FEMA rescinded this policy, requiring no rise on insurable structures during the 100-year flood, and it also requires sponsors to go through the burdensome CLOMR, which is the conditional letter of map revision process, and then after project completion, the letter of map revision process, which is similar to what developers developing houses or buildings on the floodplain would have to go through. Next slide. So this has had severe impacts to recently completed and planned projects in the South Fork Nooksack River proposed by the tribes. We've completed one project and we have 5 planned projects that intersect this FEMA floodway, and they're subject to this no rise requirement. This map shows the 6 projects. They're outlined by white polygons. These are all high priority projects for salmon recovery. We also know that effective restoration projects engage the river with the floodplain and cause rise. So FEMA's CLOMR process delays these projects, has increased engineering costs, and I wanted to highlight two of these projects as examples. They're circled in red on the map. They include Nooksack's Homesteader project and Lummi's Skookum-Edfro Phase 3 project. Next slide. The Homesteader project was led by the Nooksack tribe. There were willing landowners eager to work with the tribe to restore nearly a half mile of river. The project was ready to proceed with permitting and construction when FEMA's rescindment happened in 2020. The CLOMR process then delayed project construction by 2 years and increased engineering costs by over $355,000. Thankfully, this project was constructed in 2024 and included installation of 25 log jams. Next slide. The Skookum-Edfro Phase 3 project, being led by Lummi Nation, is a project that is in the planning stages. This is a 1-mile project reach. It's constrained by road, riprap, and other infrastructure on the floodplain, such as sheds and farms. Project engineers found through hydraulic modeling that any wood added to the river caused a rise of the water surface elevation. To work with this constraint, they used side channel and bank excavations to offset this rise, allowing us to put wood in the river to restore the in-stream habitat while also meeting the no rise requirement. Next slide. And this hydraulic modeling process delayed the project by 1 year and increased engineering costs by $240,000. The estimated excavation to meet the no rise requirement is estimated at $2.1 million in construction costs. Next slide. So this gets us to our HSIL project and our permit streamlining work group task. This task is to convene a local work group focused on finding solutions to streamlining this CLOMR-LOMR permitting process. It also provides some capacity for tribal staff to engage in meetings with elected officials, federal, state, local partners, and salmon recovery to build political will and develop solutions to streamline this process. Next slide. The deliverables include creating a local work group charter, preparing meeting summaries and agendas, and developing a report on work group recommendations. Next slide. So the Nooksack tribe and EPA are co-leads on the work group, and the purpose of the work group is to advance actions to support timely implementation of restoration projects in the regulatory floodway of the South Fork. The members commit to specific actions and timelines and to work within their authorities to identify and develop potential solutions. Next slide. Work group members include federal, tribal, county, and state staff, along with engineering consultants as needed. And this does include staff from FEMA headquarters and also FEMA Region 10. Next slide. The charter was adopted in June of 2024 and defines the purpose, membership, desired outcomes, and expectations. Next slide. We have several proposed charter outputs. They include trying to identify and resolve issues to secure these floodplain permits as much as possible at our work group meetings, to approve an RFP for a technical consultant to complete the hydraulic modeling and to support recommendations, to develop near and long-term potential solutions that will be presented in a report, and ultimately to issue local floodplain permits for these 5 projects the tribes have proposed in the South Fork. Next slide. The second HSIL task is the South Fork hydraulic modeling, which goes hand in hand with the previous task. The Nooksack tribe will contract with an engineering consultant to develop 1 or more integrated hydraulic models that can be used across these project reaches, providing efficiency for current and future design projects. And the modeling will advance development of a unified 2D hydraulic model for the FEMA floodway in the South Fork. Next slide. The tasks include notifying HSIL of a modeling decision, providing engineering progress reports, and a draft and final technical report to support the modeling. Next slide. The RFP for this work was posted in July of 2024. Watershed Science and Engineering was selected. Their project team also includes engineers from Natural Systems Design and Herrera and staff from the law and policy firm Van Ness Feldman. So this team has experts to support the hydraulic model development and recommendations for floodplain permit streamlining. And their contract was executed last November. Next slide. So to jump into our accomplishments to date, we had 12 work group meetings in 2024. Tribal staff presented on our restoration projects to FEMA staff, so they had a better understanding of our goals and our objectives, how we get funding for these projects, and the process for permitting and construction. Washington State Department of Ecology staff presented on their work supporting FEMA's risk map program and to build the technical capacity to support floodplain permitting for restoration projects. And the Watershed Science and Engineering team began preparing agendas and facilitating these meetings after they were brought in near the end of the year. Next slide. We also began differentiating work group meetings between the smaller project team, which includes the tribes, the county, the WSE engineering team, and then these larger work group meetings. And we found that this has increased efficiency and effectiveness at the meetings. We determined that a HEC-RAS 2D model will be used for the Lower South Fork. We've also identified and discussed solutions for several topics, including batched clomers, LOMers versus physical map revisions called PMRs for the South Fork, how we can maybe mitigate impacts at insurable structures, and interpretation of regulations. Next slide. Some of our barriers and opportunities. We found that using real project examples are a useful tool for understanding the process that we go through for the clomer. Differentiating between policy versus technical solutions has been something we've been working through. We've also learned that FEMA staff participants don't necessarily have the authority to make any changes. They can just provide us with guidance on the process. We found ambiguous language in the current policy, and so we're trying to seek clarification on that language. And also, we are going through the QAP process for the hydraulic model, which takes some time. And then
2-minute warning.
Next slide. Perfect. This is my last slide. So our next steps are to frame up questions for FEMA staff to seek clarification on policy and process, the development of the hydraulic model and the associated technical report, and then also development of the work group recommendations and the status of our efforts to achieve permit streamlining. Okay, that's a lot, but that's what I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I think we have time for one quick question if there's a hand or a question in the chat. Otherwise, I encourage you all to follow up with Kelly. Not seeing a quick question. Maybe everyone's questions are long, but please do follow up with Kelly and really appreciate hearing so much in depth about the status of this work. Oh, Jason. It's got to be real quick now.
I'm not going to let it go. Kelly, just real quick, how familiar are you with the Accelerating Progress committee that's been put together by the Salmon Recovery Council? Are you tied into that at all? Or
I am somewhat, Lummi has some representatives on the Salmon Recovery Council, so I try to connect with them. But yeah, I don't know. There's been so much going on this topic that it's been really hard to kind of keep track of all of the moving parts. But if you have information for me on that progress,
stay tuned. I'll reach out afterwards.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. And I see some questions coming into the chat, so feel free to connect that way as you can and not be too distracted. Awesome. Okay. All right, we're going to get into this rapid fire round of lightning talks. And then at the end of those lightning talks, April, you'll be on deck for the longer deep dive. Julianne's going to have a 4-minute timer that's going to beep for you all as we go through. And so pleased to welcome Tulalip Tribes to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, yeah, Todd Zaki with the Tulalip Tribes. I'm the Field Studies Program Manager. We are currently doing a project with HSIL funds for restoring coastal estuaries and embayments impacted by the railroad. The goal of the project is basically to get 10% designs for 10 priority sites to basically set them up for future funding applications. So right now, in the process, we have preliminary sort of desktop analysis done for the top 10 sites. We are currently in the process of doing the site surveys, which took quite some time to get the permitting and all sort of the going through the BNSF bureaucracy to get permission to access all those sites. There's lots of rules that you have to follow in trainings and all sorts of stuff. So we've completed that and we're currently doing that. And we also, because we originally goal was to do 20 sites, but we ended up in changing of being a sort of BNSF reached out to tribes and wanted to work directly with tribes. And so originally we were going to do the actual bridge crossing designs for streams, but BNSF has now, basically say we will do the design work for within the railroad prism. Outside of the prism, if we have to realign a stream or if there's infrastructure we have to work around, that's what these designs are focused on. So with the extra sort of not being able to do 20 because a lot of these other sites, we have some sites that are actually being funded under a different grant and some other work being funded elsewhere. So we ended up taking some of that remaining fund in one of the largest, or I think the largest small stream daylighting in Sequalichu Creek down near just north of Nisqually, which would be the biggest one. I think it would be like a 400-foot span to restore that one. And it has a lot of cultural and archaeological issues there. So we're helping to fund phase 1 of that investigation. And so we're hoping to start getting results out in June of this year, May, June, with all of that work. And by the end of the year, we'll have some of those design work out there for people to take a look at. So you can see on the map on there on the left, that's sort of the sites. And unfortunately, it was hard to find sites outside of that corridor between Everett and Seattle, where it's primarily where most of those stream systems are found that are of significant size. And yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to go on. It's been a lot of paperwork trying to get things lined up, not a lot of action as far as things go, but that's picking up now. So maybe I have a minute for a question or something. I don't know.
You did. You managed within a lightning talk to get a minute for questions. If there's a quick question for Todd. Hands or chat. Awesome. Well, I encourage you as your brain cells start clicking, everybody, to reach out to Todd. Thanks so much for that update and really appreciate all the leveraging work you are doing, connecting lots of different funding sources and partners, Todd.
Thank you.
All righty. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Kaufman at the Northwest Straits Foundation.
All right, hello. So the Clayton Beach eelgrass restoration feasibility and design is a partnership between Department of Natural Resources, Western Washington University Shannon Point Marine Center, state parks, and of course Herrera as our expert consultants. This project kind of came out of the nearshore restoration elements that we've been working on for several years to remove infrastructure that was part of a historic electric trolley that went over Clayton Beach and kind of ran all the way down the shoreline over from Bellingham to Bow along the interurban. During the feasibility study for the intertidal work, we did a wave model to look at kind of the impacts of wave energy on the shoreline. And it turned out that this lovely 14-acre dredge hole is having significant impacts on wave energy, increasing the energy of the waves as it approaches the toe of the slope. Right at an area where BNSF is having to dump a lot of rock pretty periodically, pretty much every other year or so. They keep adding more rock that's unconsolidated, unengineered. So as we go through different elements of our work, we're realizing, that the importance of filling this dredge hole has, multiple benefits. Initially, it was really just looking at it from improving eelgrass habitat, but there's really direct benefits to the entire project now from that perspective, allowing eelgrass to regenerate there, wave energy abatement, as well as, just the overall benefits of restoration in this entire area here along the railroad, where, as Todd's probably experiencing too, there's not that many opportunities for restoration, especially in the North Sound. So to date, previous to the HSIL paperwork being completed, we utilized other funding for DNR to map the entire eelgrass bed, do bathymetry work of the dredge hole. So that's all mapped. We have volume estimates for how much material we need to fill the hole, which exceeds 240,000 cubic yards of material. We've been initiating kind of our permitting process and by reaching out to different agencies, really more from the perspective of the beneficial reuse elements at this point. We're trying to figure out how we can connect with the Corps and work with them, work with all the different DMMO folks to see if we can utilize Swinomish dredge materials to fill the hole and kind of go from there. So future tasks, I think in the next couple of weeks, Casey Pruitt from DNR and his team are going to be out doing some sediment sampling and analysis around the eelgrass beds to look at the sediment composition. We're going to try and finalize the sediment sources, identify what our transportation costs will be, or if we can get the Corps to take it on as a project of their own to fill the hole. WDFW and Shannon Point will start to propagate and transplant native eelgrass, and we're going to hopefully start doing some additional monitoring. As I kind of mentioned, the goals here are restoring eelgrass, not just for salmon use, but plenty of marine birds utilizing this area. It's also a pretty critical fishing area for our tribes, and of course, there's always that climate resiliency thing as well. So that's kind of it so far in a Reader's Digest version.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lisa. Great to see this project taking off and to see kind of all those multiple benefits coming to the forefront as you learn more. I don't think we have time for a question, but I encourage you all to follow up with Lisa in the chat for more information or with questions. And we'll move on and turn it over to Brittany Gordon and Kitsap County.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Brittany Gordon. I'm from Kitsap County, and our project is the Kitsap County Derelict Vessel Removal Program. Our partners are the Department of Natural Resources Derelict Vessel Removal Program, and we've also recruited a very large technical advisory committee of partners, including pretty much all of the 12 port districts in Kitsap County, law enforcement agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Ecology, cities, Kitsap Public Health District, the Washington Public Ports Association and their attorney, West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery, Suquamish Tribe, the Navy, the Coast Guard, and many of the Kitsap County departments. And so our project is building an abandoned and derelict vessel program for Kitsap County that builds on DNR's existing program. In 2024, the program recruited over 30 members to a technical advisory committee. We hosted meetings to improve coordination, outlined the current vessel removal process, identified barriers and challenges, and proposed solutions to overcome those. And so in 2025, we recruited focus groups and have been working with those smaller focus groups to develop and implement the solutions that we identified in 2024. Some of the solutions that we're developing include a vessel tracking database to improve coordination as vessels move between jurisdictions, building up our webpage with resources for our partners in the public, and coordinating a vessel turn-in program event. We've also been working with our county prosecutor, the ports attorney, and law enforcement to identify policy changes that could help with enforcement and effectiveness.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany. I think we've got time for questions. If you don't get your questions out now, let's make everybody talk more during the World Café. Not seeing any. All righty. I'll then turn it over to Jason Griffith and the Stillaguamish tribe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the environmental program manager here at Stillaguamish, and we are primarily using these HSIL funds for a few of our staff members, myself included, to basically have the capacity to manage the acquisition, design, permitting, and construction of really large projects in the Stillaguamish watershed for the benefit of Chinook salmon primarily. So the Stillaguamish tribe 20 years ago now, June of 2005, was one of the authors of the Stillaguamish Chinook Recovery Plan, and that has 6 limiting factors um, a- across the watershed and geographic priority areas for the various habitat restoration needed. And so we've been working for the last 20 years on acquiring the footprint of land to do these projects. And a couple of the projects we've teed up in the last year are in the top, you can see Trafton, which is a floodplain restoration project on the North Fork. That's 2 miles of main channel restoration. I don't know, 40 some log jams, a mile long side channel, a mile of levee removal and armoring, and it's $10.5 million. And then in the bottom, you can see Zissaba 2, which is a tidal wetland project at the mouth of Hat Slough, and that's a 230-acre tidal wetland project, 10 miles of tidal channel, 1 mile of river levee removal, 1 mile of sea dike removal, and 1 mile of new levee construction. And so that's a $9.9 million project. And so we've also worked on a couple of acquisitions during the last year and closed on 14 acres along the river and a little more than a quarter mile of shoreline as well. And so going into 2025, we've issued contracts for Trafton and Zissaba. I actually have them on my desk right here this week. So we're under contract, and the contractor's going to be mobilizing to the site, and so we'll be managing construction of those 2 large projects over the next 2 field seasons, 2025 and 26. And then we're going to finish Cicero floodplain design, which is kind of similar to Trafton, but smaller, 140 acres instead of 230 acres, and get permit applications going for that project. And then we have some more acquisitions on the North Fork and Main Stem that should be exact properties are still in flux a little bit, but it'll probably be a half mile to a mile of river frontage. And so this is just building on the efforts the tribe's been doing for like I said, a couple decades. And this is just the latest large projects we're working on, but not the end or the beginning. So I think that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Jason. Any questions for Jason? Everyone took a little bit of caffeine before they came in for their lightning talks. I see any hands? Sorry, but I saw one come up. Okay, not seeing any questions for Jason. Thanks so much. We
Thanks.
will keep going. And turn it over to the San Juan Islands Conservation District.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, you're sounding great.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Mitch. I am the eelgrass restoration project manager for the San Juan Islands Conservation District. We're working to restore eelgrass in the San Juan Islands through scalable and seed-based restoration methods. Our overarching goal is to develop scalable seed-based restoration methods to help reverse the decline of eelgrass habitat in the islands, which is pretty drastic and getting worse, unfortunately. Another HSIL will be addressing that. Our specific objectives are to improve the seed collection, storage, and planting techniques to increase our germination success rates, expand our eelgrass cultivation systems at Friday Harbor Labs to hold 500,000 seeds, which is a massive increase in our capacity, and we have completed, which is great. And then enhancing adaptive management and long-term monitoring, ensuring restoration is data-driven, measurable, and scalable. Ultimately, our goal is to make eelgrass restoration efforts more effective and scalable. So from this past year, our biggest successes were, besides just all the paperwork and it being our first year having me run the project, is that we reached a record-breaking harvest where we collected 130,000 seeds, which was done in tandem with the construction as we went and all the paperwork. So we seem like we'll be well on our way to getting that target number of 500,000 every year. We have collaborated with a ton of different partners, such as Padilla Bay, who was a major harvest partner and is doing research on our harvest as we go, making sure we're not impacting the meadows we collect from. We also work with courses at Friday Harbor Laboratories, and as well as we've been working with the eelgrass stressor, HSIL, WDFW, WDNR, FHL, and San Juan County really closely to sort of pair the restoration with the resiliency studies to make sure that we're planting in areas that are going to, actually grow and stay healthy. So specifically, looking ahead to the next year, it's really all about getting seeds in the ground. We've built our systems. We've got our harvest techniques down. I'm expanding. We're getting more technicians on. We're going to be working with these partners to be doing our monitoring, and now we're ready to go and really start hitting the planting hard. We're going to be trying a bunch of different techniques and hopefully getting a plan down on how this thing will continue to expand from here. So looking forward to the next year, and thanks.
Awesome. Any questions for Mitch? Oh, I see a Cliff Notes. Mitch, if you want to quickly address the Cliff Notes process of harvesting seeds from a marine plant.
Great. We go out, we can either free dive or scuba or wade out, and it's really simple. They flower, so they have seeds like wheat would, looks a lot like a wheat flower, and you just take a pair of shears and you clip the bottom and take the whole flower out. We put them into our storage system, our eelgrass cultivation system, and then the eelgrass seeds fall out, separate them, count them, and then plant them in a variety of methods and techniques that I won't get into here. And it doesn't damage the plant.
Perfect Cliff Notes, right on time. And if you want the longer manual, follow up with Mitch. Thanks so much for giving us that update. We are going to head on and turn it over to Skagit River System Cooperative and Mike.
Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Mike Lemoyne. I'm Research and Recovery Director here at Skagit River System Cooperative. And our HSIL project is a collaborative project with NOAA Fisheries, the Nature Conservancy, Tulalip Tribes, and Snoqualmie Tribe of Indians. I'm always happy to follow up on Jason's restoration work and figure out what's going on in the Stilly. This project specifically is trying to get into estuarine habitats that we know that juvenile Chinook use, specifically what we call these blind tidal channels that have a unique shape in across the landscape, which is a dendritic shape. And what we're trying to understand is how the shape of the channel networks might be influencing the distribution of juvenile Chinook salmon and other fishes within their networks. So one thing that we know is confluences can often be really important in stream systems for biodiversity. And so the idea is trying to nail down in these systems to provide justification for restoration practitioners to excavate more potentially if that's usable for fish. Where we're at right now is 2024. We had to do some mapping to develop our QAPP, and we have completed, I believe today I'm getting signatures on our QAPP, yay. And partly finalized kind of the design elements with the research team. In 2025, we're going with April synoptic flow, which is very much intensive. We are going in and sampling each one of these kind of tidal networks in a snapshot type way, and then going out in summer and doing some habitat surveys and preliminary analysis. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. We've got time for a question.
Maybe if I add, since there isn't a question, our hope is that we'll be able to link fish numbers with, if some of you have used them, Dr. Greg Hood's allometric predictions, so that you'll have both a habitat and fish benefit from allometric predictions going forward. So our hope is that this work will really inform estuarine restoration design.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And there's a quick question around how prevalent are estuaries of this shape in Puget Sound?
Very prevalent.
Awesome.
Very, yeah.
And I'm seeing some other chats from Jason around adding for title channel design, and I think a question around collaboration, around how your collaboration has been maintained currently.
Yeah, with the federal staff uncertainties, not to take too much time, it's mosaic. So far, the watershed program at NMFS has been fairly unimpacted by current cuts, so that's been okay. But I can tell you, Forest Service collaborations and other federal collaborations have resulted in, all I can say right now is imaginative, adaptive management of contracts and work.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate the update. Further questions for Mike, please put them in the chat. And we're going to keep moving forward and turn it over to our WDFW folks and Jessica.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Jessica Sandoval. I am a fish and wildlife biologist with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm currently the lead bio on a project called Puget Sound Starts Here, making habitat from stormwater pond infrastructure. You can probably tell by this slide, I will be using 4 minutes. So I work with a small but wonderful team consisting of Kylie Hackett, who is our seasonal technician that collects a lot of field data with me. Our project lead is actually Simone DeRoche. She is currently out on parental leave, so I am just doing this project update on her behalf. And I also want to mention Max Lambert, who is our former project lead and the one who secured this HSIL funding for this study, and is very much a part of our team still. So the overall goal of this project is to determine which stormwater pond features best provide habitat for our native wildlife. And we're mainly focused on amphibians, birds, and beavers in this study. So while the primary function of stormwater pond infrastructure is to control, filter, and treat runoff in urban areas, we're really interested in what kind of pond characteristics best provide habitat for our native species. So we're interested in things like surrounding land cover, vegetation, hydro period, etc. And ultimately, we want to provide optional advice for the jurisdictions that we work with that want to naturalize ponds to serve this dual purpose of both stormwater management and native wildlife habitat. So we have a ton of partners in order to accomplish this. We work with the Woodland Park Zoo, Kitsap County, and the Whatcom County Amphibian Monitoring Program. And for that part of the study, we're working with their volunteer community scientists to compare amphibian monitoring data from those volunteers to our own data to assess the accuracy and hopefully standardize community science programs within our region. We also partner with WSU Puyallup, and we're working with researchers there on the socioeconomic angle to determine whether or not these stormwater ponds are distributed in an equitable manner across our region. And finally, we partner with over 10 city and county jurisdictions. We have partners from the city of Tumwater up to King County and all the way up to the city of Bellingham, with many more sprinkled in between there, as you can see in the map in number 3. So over the past year, I think we have accomplished quite a lot. We have surveyed over 200 stormwater ponds within these 6 counties that we work in. So we've done a variety of bird surveys, we've done amphibian egg mass surveys, larval trapping surveys, recorded beaver sign, and characterized the habitat of over 200 stormwater ponds and natural ponds. So things like water quality metrics and vegetation within and around the pond. Under number 4, you can see some initial preliminary results shown here for our amphibian egg mass data for the 4 species of pond breeding amphibians that we're primarily focused on. So to quickly orient you, the shaded circles and shaded polygons indicate that those species are present, whereas the white circles and dashed polygons indicate that those species are absent from those ponds. So if you focus on the top 2 figures with northwestern salamanders and red-legged frogs, you can see that some species show an association with certain pond attributes. So for example, the northwestern salamander and the red-legged frog there at the top prefer deeper ponds with less built surroundings. And you can see that on the Y and X axis. So we're about 1 year into the project. In the next year, we are going to collect a ton more data. I'm in the midst of doing that right now. I have some folks out counting egg masses as we speak. We're going to focus in on some particular questions that we're interested in. For example, we're interested in looking at where we have the co-occurrence of invasive American bullfrogs and northwestern salamander, if we have the possibility of priority effects of those species where they occur together. And we're going to continue to answer questions from jurisdictions and continue to work with them to create more habitat for native species. So that is all for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And as promised, you used up your 4 minutes, but please do put questions for Jessica in the chat or follow up after this. All right, and we're going to turn it over to Department of Natural Resources.
Hey there, I'm Tynan Ram Granberg. I'm the lead vegetation ecologist with the Washington Natural Heritage Program here at DNR. Our program stewards a large database of known locations of rare plants, animals, and rare or high quality ecosystem occurrences in Washington. And in this project, our goal has been to leverage that database and simplify our conservation message by developing a map of what we're calling essential conservation areas. So we're delineating areas around clusters of species and ecosystem locations, with each of those areas representing basically our estimate of what would be necessary to protect those elements into the future, factoring in things like buffering from anthropogenic disturbance and the size of the contributing watershed basin and things like that. And so then each of these areas is then assigned a rank based on its biodiversity significance, its management urgency, protection urgency, and climate change vulnerability of the ecosystem type or species. And then ultimately we'll end up with a map that can be used to identify sensitive areas, for example, as part of a SEPA or forest practices review, identify potential natural area preserves, and guide other conservation land acquisitions. And these ECAs are units of conservation that'll be easier to communicate than our current, overwhelming database of thousands of overlapping features and confusing scientific names. As part of this work, we've also been funded to survey for ecosystems and rare plants known to occur in the Puget Sound drainage basin, but are either absent or underrepresented in our database. And so that was basically our primary task in 2024. My colleague, Molly Wiebush, and I were able to document more than 90 new locations of rare plants and rare high quality ecosystems in the basin. And 30 of those ecosystem occurrences were documented. 30 of those ecosystem occurrences were the first time that they had been documented in our database at all. Another 33 had been revisited for the first time in more than 40 years. And altogether, this brings our current total number of records for the drainage basin up to nearly 1,500. A couple of other highlights from 2024, Molly relocated a population of Oregon false golden aster that hadn't been seen at that site since the 1930s. And I expanded the documented extent of a beautiful flower, the twin sister sandwort, which is a narrow endemic of the North Cascades. Basically extended the area that we knew that it occurred by roughly 40 times. And I'll put a couple of pictures in the chat when I'm done. In 2024, we also completed a number of species distribution models in collaboration with NatureServe that helped guide some of our survey efforts. And we're now in the final stages of updating the conservation status ranks for a selection of ecosystems and rare plants from around the basin. These represent estimates of extinction risk of each species and ecosystem, and they contribute to our ranking of the biodiversity significance of each of the essential conservation areas that we're delineating. And so after we finish those updates, then we'll move on to actually delineating and prioritizing those essential conservation areas themselves. And yeah, it was a really fun and productive summer. Thanks, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that update. And if you have any questions for Tynan, please put them in the chat. I'm excited to see your pictures as they come through. But now I'm going to turn it over to Department of Commerce to talk about map tools. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Tara Newman. I'm a senior planner in the Department of Commerce's Growth Management Services, and I'm leading our project to update and develop map tools for local and regional land use planning. Some of you might be familiar with our Puget Sound land use mapping project, which standardizes land use and zoning maps across all 12 Puget Sound counties and their 113 cities, and also contains actual annual housing development data. These maps provide a standardized depiction of land use and growth across the Puget Sound region that's used by local governments and resource agencies to compare planned versus actual development within and across jurisdictional boundaries and assess the effectiveness of land use and growth management policies. So the first part of our funded project has been to update those maps, which are currently about 12 years old. Updating the maps will allow analysis of current land use patterns as well as trends over the past decade, so we can look at where local governments are designating growth and where they're limiting development to protect natural resources, and we'll be able to assess how those designations align with recovery priorities. So this process has involved collecting each local government's new zoning maps, as well as other maps for things like roads, water bodies, and natural resource lands, and combining all of that into an updated standardized land use layer that translates each local government's zoning designations into our standardized land use categories. And we're also updating our annual housing data that's attached to that layer. So we're probably about 90 to 95% done with the data collection and standardization process for all of the jurisdictions in the Puget Sound region, and then we'll be developing the integrated land use layer this summer. After that, we'll be working on an analysis of growth trends over the past 10 years, as well as developing a web map tool for local planners to use our updated maps alongside other resource agency maps for comprehensive planning. We're interested in looking at questions related to where zoning changes have taken place and whether they're consistent with growth management goals, whether changes in observed housing density are consistent with zoning changes, which areas are seeing higher low levels of growth, where growth is occurring relative to critical areas, working lands, climate change risks, priority watersheds, and other natural resource concerns, how much land cover change has resulted from recent growth, how growth aligns with environmental justice indicators and priorities, how growth aligns with transit options, walkability, open space, food availability, and other community services, and how to identify the most appropriate areas for local governments to increase their planned density. So if you're interested in these kinds of questions as well and would be interested in helping guide our analysis and web map development as an advisor, feel free to reach out to me about getting involved. We anticipate engaging advisors from resource agencies and local governments around the Puget Sound. So that's the quick update of where we're at with the Puget Sound Land Use Mapping Project. We're excited to complete the updated layer this summer and move on to the analysis portion of our project. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tara. Is there a quick question out there? Not seeing any, but I encourage you to put them on, put any of your questions into the chat. I realize you have to get your thinking caps on and almost formulate your question in the first 2 minutes. Otherwise, it's hard to get there at the end. There's so much great information. We're going to keep moving and go back to Brittany for another round 2. And I see those questions are already popping into the chat, so that'll keep Tara busy. But go ahead, Brittany.
Hi, it's Brittany again from Kitsap County, and I'm here to give an update on the Kitsap Natural Resource Asset Management Program, affectionately known as the KINRAM. The project's developing and implementing the Kitsap Natural Resource Asset Management Program. The KINRAM is bringing natural resources to the forefront of decision-making across all Kitsap County departments by managing natural resources as community assets in the public trust to be stewarded with the same strategic approach as built assets. And our partners on the program are Washington Conservation Action Education Fund, the Suquamish Tribe, the Port Gamble-Sklallam Tribe, and Wildfish Conservancy. So in 2024, the KINRAM program was successfully adopted and institutionalized into the Kitsap County Comprehensive Plan. We implemented the program in 2 pilot watersheds. We developed maps with level of service, and we developed a countywide implementation plan. Wildfish Conservancy also completed updated stream typing maps for the Big Beef Creek watershed, and they've started moving into some other watersheds to improve our inventory of our stream asset data layer. We continued building our data layers for our natural assets. And in 2025, we're moving toward full countywide implementation. we're starting to bring information from the CAN-RAMP program into county decision-making processes, such as the Transportation Improvement Program, the Capital Facilities Plan update, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, and our Rural Comprehensive Planning process called Year of the Rural. We'll also be hosting 2 workshops this year for other local jurisdictions, tribes, and any other interested parties to learn about the program and to collaborate and learn from each other. And at the end of the year, we'll be releasing our first State of the Natural Assets overview, which we intend to serve as an annual briefing that can guide decision-making in the coming year.
Thanks so much, Brittany, for that update. We do have time for questions for Brittany. Not seeing any. But of course, as soon as I move on, they come in the chat. But I encourage you to put them in the chat for Brittany. We're going to go on to our final lightning talk for this session and then into our deep dive. So turn it over to Bob, Shore Friendly.
Hey guys, I'm Bob Warner. I'm a grant manager at RCO generally, but I'm a grant recipient for this talk. And so I'm going to go over our Shore Friendly strategic engagement projects. And this slide here is really busy because this project's really busy, and it's kind of complex because we have so many partners and we have so many different things going on. It's our partnership includes 6 Puget Sound shore-friendly lead organizations, so local governments and tribes, and some little bit nonprofit organizations that are working together on shore-friendly to cover the whole Puget Sound. And WDFW, Jenna Jewett, works with us on this project. And so the kind of foundational idea with shore-friendly is to change the behavior in Puget Sound, specifically of landowners along the shoreline. I really kind of think it's more like changing perspectives on the shoreline, helping people understand the values of like a natural shoreline relative to an armored shoreline, and kind of help them to possibly reduce the shoreline armoring through restoration. And so this project in particular couples with our Shore Friendly program, which is more of a capital program and less of an outreach program. But we apply this broad outreach strategy with a focus on finally coming into our landowners and trying to help our landowners, like I said, understand the values of a natural shoreline, but also help them kind of in a broad effort to discover some restoration projects and some opportunities where we can reduce armoring and do some shoreline restoration. So on this slide, I kind of took a smattering of the things that the different 6 organizations are doing just to show you what we've been up to since we started this project. You see that we've been had articles in several publications, like public or kind of local publications. We do meetings like beach walks where we have our lead organizations that might partner up with restoration professional, like an engineering group or something, to bring people out on the shoreline and show them the types of things that we're hoping to do. We have videos, we have short videos just for like TikTok type videos, and we have longer videos that you might see on YouTube to explain it and show to a broad audience what we're up to. And then we have these one things, I think that's probably the most successful thing we've been doing so far are these influencer workshops. So we are calling kind of the local contractors and people that are doing shoreline work, the influencers, and also of course permitting. But so far we've been doing these influencers with some contractors. It's a picture of Lisa Kaufman, who you saw earlier today. And we've had just great success. We have more people showing up to them than we expected. And these local contractors that have been doing shoreline work for years, sometimes not things that we want them to do, but they've been discovering how there's different options for what you can do along the shoreline. And they're really excited to participate in hopefully doing some restoration on the shorelines when we find the opportunities. In the coming year, we're going to have workshops for the planners, so local people that are doing permitting and planning, to help them understand the options that we have on the shorelines and the opportunities that we have to do restoration. And we're going to be just continuing doing the outreach, some more kind of in-depth videos and some more workshops at the local level to help kind of create opportunities and get the word out to the landowners.
Great. Thanks so much for this update on Shore Friendly, Bob. And I encourage you to put any questions you have for Bob in the chat. So with that, wow, that was a really quick run through of some amazing work and hopefully spark some ideas for some follow-ups. Before we have a break, we're going to kind of put on our kind of extended caps, and I'm going to turn it over to April Hines with City of Everett to talk about the Regreen Everett behavior change campaign. So April, floor is yours, and I'll give you a warning at 10 minutes, and then the time will go to 13.
Okay, thanks. Hi, so yeah, I'm April Hines with the City of Everett, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the goal of Regreen Everett is to engage with North and Swamp Creek urban riparian property owners within city limits to increase or revegetate their yards to assist with water quality and climate change resiliency. And since this is kind of a behavior change campaign, we're really relying on social marketing principles to develop, design, and implement this campaign. And that's really what we've been working on for over the last year or so. So next slide. Since I'm not sure how many of you are aware of what social marketing really is, I know it's kind of been bandied about in a lot of different forums. I just wanted to kind of take a moment to kind of define it. So social marketing applies marketing principles and techniques to create and communicate and deliver value in order to influence target audience behaviors that benefits the community as a whole. So not just that target audience, but the larger community. And in general, people usually fall kind of into three buckets when you're doing looking at behavior change, and it's the kind of show me people, the help me people, and make me people. And really the social marketing techniques that we're applying here is really for that help me group. So the group that has shown some interest, they just need a little bit of a nudge and the tools in order to do that. So it uses formative research to understand similar programs, audience surveys or focus groups to identify the barriers, the benefits, and competition to the wanted behavior. It uses a strategic marketing mix to address barriers and enhance motivators like using incentives, pledges, maybe humorous messaging, and using various communication channels. And you formulate kind of a communication plan that has a built-in evaluation component. Next slide. So one of the first things we did was a literature review, which is where we looked at about a mix of about 6 behavior change reports on any kind of topic. It didn't have to necessarily be a riparian landowner behavior change program. And then we also looked at some stream-side landowner programs that had some kind of evaluative reports. And while reading through these, we gleaned stuff about, what does existing data tell us? Does it discuss specific aspects of what the problem is? What segments of the audience does it identify? And what approaches worked and have not worked? Next slide. So I kind of grouped these findings from the literature review into audiences and program components and kind of separated them out. So let's kind of look at what we found through the literature review when talking about the audience, a riparian audience in most cases, but can also be a little bit more of general topics. So there really is a lack of knowledge specific to riparian work. They're really not clear about what to do, or they're worried about doing it wrong, potentially. They may feel like they have a very uniquely complicated site. So doing that means they have regular rules don't really apply. They may need more help. A major deterrent is the perceived and probably more likely real high cost of rehabbing their site and the amount of effort it will do to do the actual behavior. So many show a willingness to do the behavior, but again, other factors can get in the way of that. So have the intention is not really a guarantee that they'll be doing the behavior. In riparian communities, neighbor-to-neighbor interaction and information sharing can be really high, but actually trying to define what a riparian community or a neighborhood is can be sometimes difficult. Many are risk averse and want guarantees that what they're doing is going to be correct and actually solve the problem. And there can be aversion to what feels like government involvement, whether that's perceived or real. Next. So the other key takeaways related to the actual program aspects. So it's really important to be consistent with all of your materials and making sure they kind of have the same look and feel. And to have really 2 or 3 really strong key messages and to really keep it simple and not overly complicate your message. Make sure that the engagement is geared towards the landowner and what they want and not necessarily what you want them to think or feel. So for example, for us, specific to this campaign, we want them to do a behavior of revegetating their streamside yard to help with water quality, but the property owner might be more concerned about attracting wildlife or shoring up just their stream bank, and they're not necessarily thinking about water quality. So face-to-face interactions are essential. Using local images are really important so that they can see what's possible and attainable. And it's also important in your outreach at the people of talking to them when they are making those decisions. So if you want to talk to them about potentially changing their riparian area to deal with flooding, doing it when they're having those concerns, not necessarily doing it when they're not. So really meeting them when they're having those crunches of making decisions. Next. So along with the literature review, we also did interviewing of some programs in the area. So we talked to 4 landowner-related or incentive-based programs in the Puget Sound. And when we talked to them, these extended interviews, we asked about their program and how it was structured, who was their primary audience, how did they engage with their audience and outreach to them, what were some lessons learned, and finally we took some time to really discuss what they thought might be some of the barriers to participation for their audiences. Next. So for those interviewed, some of the key findings about riparian audiences are that they seem to consistently have a lack of engagement from this audience in particular. There was low workshop turnout. There might be some initial interest, but very little follow through. And if the solution was costly, they're simply just not going to do it if there's no financial support for them. Many programs felt they needed to be very clear what their role was when talking to landowners, especially if they're perceived as a government entity, needing to be clear that they're there just to help, advise, assist, and not really looking to catch them doing something wrong or enforcing certain rules that might not be up to code. Audience are overwhelmed by the information that's out there and all the advice on what they can be doing. So they may be out there talking to their neighbors or Googling, and it's just a lot of information, and it can kind of cause that paralysis of not doing anything. And can feel frustrated by how much work they need to do. And in the end, they may just see it as too much work and just not be doing anything. So, and also finally, finding ways to build trust is a good rule of thumb. So being consistent in your customer service, answering questions in a timely manner, even if you don't know the answer, and being clear in the expectations and reality of how the program will work. Next. So 2 of the discussion points that kind of came up is when you're talking about your target audience size, we're very focused on this North and Swamp Creek kind of audience. But really it's more than just riparian landowners that influence the stream's health. So is it more important to keep a small audience, or should it be a larger target audience? And the other thing was just really making sure that you understand your audience before going forward with any programs. Because of this lackluster engagement, it can be really important to not group all riparian property owners together. Urban versus rural, size of their property, what their issues are. Those can be really important things to understand before reaching out to this audience. Next. So when talking to these other various programs, some of the things that came up when looking at the program components is making sure that you speak directly to your audience. Again, I've already said this, but just that idea of talking to them about what their wants are and not necessarily what you want from them. That can be a lot more important and a lot more interesting to the audience. Being concise, visually simple, and keeping it local. Again, they get inundated with a lot of information, so keeping it simple and making sure that it's local. Be sure to have that before and after documentation once you're doing the project, because this can really feed into the idea of down the road being able to show local success stories and make landowners feel like they're being successful. The timing of outreach can be critical. It's important to time it with when the landowners are more than likely to be making decisions. Again, we've kind of mentioned that. Set the expectation early on with participants if they're looking for advocates, that you're looking for advocates for the program, and making sure that you're familiar with the permit process, because that will come up during your discussions. And then again, making sure that you're keeping that outreach local. And that actually also means when you're doing any kind of workshops or anything that you meet the audience where they're at. Don't make them come to you. Next. So the other component that we did was an audience survey. So part of that was to roll out the survey to North and Swamp Creek riparian owners, which we did in December. The data we hope to gather with these audience surveys falls into 4 buckets. One really being the background variables. So what have been their past experience with doing the target behavior, their attitude about the behavior, what do they perceive as the advantages or the disadvantages of the behavior, skills. Does the audience know how or feel confident in doing the behavior? And then finally, the environmental constraints. What are the factors that challenge or facilitate the behavior? Next. So some of the ahas from the audience surveys that we did have a very small audience pool. We decided because of the amount of information that we really wanted to focus just on North and Swamp Creek riparian property owners within the city limits, and that's only about 1,000. So 1,000 invites were sent out to complete the survey, and we got about a 3.5 response rate, which is small, but given that this was a direct mail invite with no incentives attached to the survey, that's really in line with what you might see with a direct mail request. So we're still sifting through the data, but I did want to highlight just a few things from the survey. The first was the surprise of neighbors. Neighbors really was listed as the top place that landowners learn about how to care for their streamside properties, more than online, more than other environmental groups. So, thinking about how we can leverage that. There was a question that stated, knowing that there can be benefits to taking care of your streamside property, rate how important each reason why you would do it. The reasons included your view, property values, reducing flooding, etc. Interestingly, improving habitat for wildlife and stream health were among the top answers, which demonstrates a willingness to make improvements that benefit the whole and not just themselves, which was a little counterintuitive to what we were seeing in some of the other data. And finally, to the survey question that's listed on this slide. So, has any of the following occurred on your property? Invasive species was the overwhelming issue that riparian landowners face, and most had the most frustration with. Being a part of a municipality, honestly, we hear a lot more about erosion and flooding and flow issues. And so I was actually personally a little surprised at how overwhelming invasive species were and the main concern for folks. So it just kind of pointed to some of a blinder that I might have when putting together the campaign. Next.
And
got
a 2-minute warning. I didn't hit you.
Okay, thanks. So in a previous question, we learned that 30% of the respondents said they had seasonal flooding or drainage concerns. Yet when on question 9, they kind of showed that they spend actually very little time doing any work needed to fix this issue. So this really points to an opportunity that the campaign has to really meet the needs of the audience and offer a solution to them. Next. So, as to some of the barriers to the behavior our audience might have, the top reasons for not doing the behavior, which again, like I said, is revegetating their streamside property, was time, money, they're unable to do the work, or they don't know how to do the work. And the top resources that they would like to see included in-person site visits, labor and financial assistance, a streamside landowner guide, and a how-to videos. Next. And these were exciting results because bottom line, it means that we're right on track with the way where we were going. So, some of the things that we learned in these things can be, not really ahas, but can be really just a validation of the direction you're going. And so that was really exciting. So I don't have time to really go in depth of how we're going to use all this research and how we create our campaign, but I wanted to just put kind of a sneak peek of where we're going, because I would love to have any thoughts or suggestions or ideas in the chat about how we can use some of this data. We have heard overwhelmingly that no one knows what riparian means, so we did kind of rebrand it to be streamside yards. And we also were using kind of the terminology of sign up for a backyard makeover. So to not make it sound too overwhelming, maybe a little touch of fun, perhaps, and really trying to mix up the in-person and virtual workshops to really meet people where they're at, because especially in our North and Swamp Creek, there really is no community areas. It's a very urban area that doesn't really allow for that. So being very flexible about where we're going to have these workshops was an important component. And I think with that, I can turn it back over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, April. You guys have been busy. What a wealth of knowledge you pulled together. Well, I really appreciate that and the chance to dig in and learn more about that work at the City of Everett. And I encourage everybody to put some questions or thoughts or follow-ups in the chat for April. We're just about on time, a few minutes early, so we're going to take our break shortly. And when we come back, we're going to go into a World Cafe. So it'll be a chance for everybody to talk and share and exchange ideas. I'm going to put the questions in the chat now just to give folks time as you go on your break to think about what breakout room you might want to go into. But don't worry, there'll be some directions as to what to do when you come back. And so we're going to I think we'll give ourselves a little extra time and take a 7-minute break and come back at 2:25. And if you have any questions, we'll be here during the break. Thanks very much so much. Welcome back, everyone, from the break. Hope you all got a little something to keep you going for this last hour on a Wednesday. I'm pretty excited to dive into the next round of lightning talks and one final deep dive, and then we'll wrap up with some final closing remarks and links to more information and some upcoming opportunities. Our first lightning talk that we've got going on this afternoon actually is just me providing an update on behalf of Bonneville Environmental Foundation. Alan Warren, unfortunately, was unable to join us today. So I'm going to give a brief update on their project and then invite you to contact Alan for any further updates. So this is a flexible state funding sources convening, which Alan says is a long-winded way of saying Transfer Development Rights Work Group, or TDR Work Group. Alan Warren is the lead with Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and they have other lead partners from Forterra and ESA. And their coalition partners include Department of Ecology, the Recreation and Conservation Office, the State Conservation Commission, Washington Association of Lands Trust, Whatcom Family Farmers, Puget Sound Partnership, the Department of Commerce, and Pierce, King, and Snohomish counties. And this broader group of partners makes up what they're calling the TDR work group. And their goal here is to think about the state's investments in over $100 million per biennium in acquisitions to conserve habitat and open space. However, grant program policies prevent these funds from being leveraged with transfer development right credits, the way local investments in conservation are. So this coalition of partners is working to change that policy by creating a legal and programmatic framework to allow TDR credit sales revenue to be recycled into additional acquisitions or to fill other capacity constraints of the conservation system. So some accomplishments that Alan would like to share out from the last year include a legal analysis that was completed and a memo issued that provides a clear legal framework to allow this policy update. The coalition partners have been convened for 4 workgroup meetings to discuss recommendations for how to manage revenues. And the Recreation Conservation Office and Ecology Leadership have been engaged to help facilitate next steps. So looking ahead for the next year, they're working with agency leadership to approve a request of the State Bond Council to formally weigh in on the legal analysis. The work group is going to think about providing final recommendations for grant program policy and programmatic frameworks, and grant program policy update processes are intended to be initiated. So Julianne's put Alan's email in the chat, and we encourage you to reach out to him for more questions. And with that quick update, I'm going to keep us moving, and we're going to move on to Department of Commerce. Take it away, Angela.
Hi, folks. My name is Angela Sanfilippo. I'm the Ecosystem Services Program Manager with the Department of Commerce. So the goal of this project, it's great to be following Alan's presentation there. I know you lumped these together on purpose, but the goal is really to advance the use of transfer of development rights and landscape conservation and local infrastructure programs throughout the Puget Sound region. So really quick overview, TDR is a market-based tool that supports the voluntary transfer of development rights from farm, forest, and natural areas to urban areas that can accommodate additional growth. This helps to encourage development in urban areas that already have infrastructure in place, such as transit, schools, jobs, parks, all sorts of things that help growing communities provide infrastructure and services more efficiently. And then the LCLIP is a complementary program for cities specifically in the King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties that helps link TDR with tax increment financing that provides cities with additional revenue for infrastructure in exchange for accepting TDR credits. So to do this work and to help advance both of those programs throughout the region, we are working with a consultant team that's led by Echo Northwest to develop a guidebook and a toolkit for local governments that are interested in pursuing TDR and LCLIP, and also working with several LCLIP eligible jurisdictions on feasibility studies. We're hoping that helps to take some of the burden off of local governments that are interested in pursuing and implementing these programs, but they don't necessarily have the staff capacity, technical expertise, or other resources to pursue them on their own. So this year, in addition to bringing Echo Northwest on board, we have been doing extensive kind of strategic outreach to a diverse group of 20 cities across the 3 LCLIP counties. We identified those 20 cities based on their market conditions, potential political support, and other criteria for success for TDR and LCLIP programs. Even with our extensive outreach and the benefit of bringing capacity to local jurisdictions, it has been rather difficult to get cities on board. Local governments have a lot on their plates, and most of the jurisdictions in the central Puget Sound region that we were reaching out to were also in the last stages of updating their comprehensive plans and development regulations. So just a lot going on at once. But we are currently working on finalizing a work plan with one city and through additional outreach, as well as some upcoming workshops. We hope to recruit additional cities this year to participate in those feasibility studies. The guidebook itself is in a draft form and currently under internal review. And we will have our first informational educational session that follows that guidebook and provides a lot of resource to local governments. We'll be holding that first workshop planned for June with additional workshops and a more publicly available draft of the guidebook to come later in the year. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. I'd encourage you to send any follow-up questions to Angela in the chat and look forward to seeing those updates come to fruition. All right, we're going to keep us moving and turn it over to Thurston County.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Benjamin, Natural Resources Program Manager at Thurston County's Community Planning Economic Development Department and Project Manager for our HSIL grant. Our project, Working Lands Conservation Strategy, examines the county's conservation programs, the Conservation Futures, Habitat Conservation Program, Transfer of Development Rights, and more across spatial and user group parameters. The project identifies where our conservation programs have been used, where working lands are located throughout the county, and seeks feedback from both prospective and historic conservation program users on how we can incentivize and remove barriers to further participation. The project's technical advisory group consists of working landowners, agricultural and forestry, nonprofit organizations like farmland trusts and land trusts, state agency staff, tribal government staff, federal agency staff. Thurston County is collaborating closely on spatial analysis and workshop facilitation with our partners from Environmental Science Associates, and are excited about the level of interest and engagement in taking a holistic look at how Thurston County programs support working land owners and operators to create conservation outcomes. Last year, we worked with our technical advisory group to review and invite feedback on geospatial analysis methods we're using in our mapping. Results from this workshop have been instrumental in developing those maps, which are just about complete. In the coming year, we're excited to work with our technical advisory group to develop recommendations for potential updates to our programs based on or considering our spatial findings.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that update. We have time for a question or so if there's any questions for Brian. Hands are in the chat. Not seeing any. That coffee you all had at break doesn't seem to be kicking in. All right, thanks so much, but please do follow up if that question comes to you. And we're going to keep going with the Forward Stewardship Expansion Project. Nolan, are you here? There you are. Take it away, Nolan.
Hello. Sorry, I'm actually currently spending HSIL money planting this field, so my connection is not great, but okay, I can see the slide now. So I'm Nolan Kitts from the Snohomish Conservation District. We manage a program that is a combination of, I think, 11 Puget Sound conservation districts, and it's basically supporting the expansion of forest stewardship programs at all those conservation districts. The main focuses of the program are outreach and education. We do some afforestation projects, which is what I'm working on right now. We're planting 4.5 acres up in Darrington along Ashton Creek, which flows into Squire Creek, which flows into the Stillaguamish. And then we do a lot of interagency and then inter-conservation district collaboration, along with technical assistance and climate resilience. So over the past year, a lot of conservation districts have been building up their forestry programs. Some of those programs were non-existent beforehand, so a lot of new hires. And we've been trying to just like support each other in getting those forestry programs up and running. We are funding afforestation projects, which, if you're not familiar with the term, it's just planting a forest where it was not otherwise forested. So a lot of abandoned or degraded pastures, things like that. We've been doing our ongoing collaboration between the conservation districts. And then we've been focusing a lot on education and outreach. We're producing some videos and vignettes and brochures to just engage with landowners and the public in general about the value of working forests and forest lands. So over the next year, we're going to continue with our outreach material, continue our technical assistance, and I think a lot of the districts are wrapping up their planting projects this spring.
Awesome. Thanks for that update. Yeah, we're probably all envious that we're also all not out in the field with you. Any questions for Nolan before he goes back? Enjoying nature? Listening to you all? Kelly.
I had a question. I used to work for you guys, and so I remember you when this was all being put together. I'm curious, are you are you doing some of these projects on and then still have like cattle and farm and grazing, interspersed among like agroforestry, or is it just forest land that you're reforesting? I was just curious.
I would say for Snohomish Conservation District, we are doing silvopasture projects like that, but that's not part of the HSIL grant. So some of the districts are doing work like that, but the projects funded by HSIL are more just like reforestation, full closed canopy forests.
Great. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
Not seeing any other follow-ups. Thanks so much, Nolan. And feel free to reach out to him if you other questions come your way. And we're going to keep ourselves moving and head over to the other Bonneville Environmental Foundation project. Kayla.
Hey there, everyone. Great to be on the call. And yeah, good to hear from you, Nolan. My name is Kayla Seaforth. I work for Bonneville Environmental Foundation as a project manager in our watersheds department, alongside Alan Warren, who you heard about his project a little bit earlier on the call. Alan also was kind of the brain behind the Carbon Credits Regional Operator project and brought me on a little over a year ago to act as the technical lead on this project. And I've been managing our HSIL grant in that year, and it has been a lot of fun. So the Carbon Credit Regional Operator pilot project is an effort to connect restoration and preservation projects in Puget Sound and a little bit outside of Puget Sound as well through other funding sources with environmental markets. So leveraging the state and other investments in habitat restoration and protection, and looking at those projects that are going in on the ground and seeing how they can work with carbon credits in the voluntary market. And we have several implementation partners that we're working with. Those are Skagit Conservation District, South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group, Whatcom County, City of Sumner, Mountains to Sound Greenway, and then we also brought on an additional non-Puget Sound partner through additional funding source, that is the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, just to kind of have something to compare to outside of Puget Sound and see how this can work in different geographies. And in the last year, we have worked with both Skagit Conservation District and South Puget Sound Salmon Enhancement Group to enroll 2 projects that are both around 15 acres of afforestation. Thanks for that, the definition, Nolan. And it's been full of a lot of learning and growth, and they've been really excellent partners to work with through that process. And now we're kind of moving into the phase of how to sell credits and what the market is, and all of that fun, because the goal is ultimately to sell credits and return funding to these partners to steward sites in the long term. And so there's lots of work to do in that vein. We've also secured some additional funding to look at that in greater depth and also bring on additional partners in other geographies in Washington and Oregon. And so that work will start to kick off in the next year as well. So it's been a fun year, and really grateful for the support from the HSIL program to kick this off. I think that's all I have to share for now.
Thanks so much. We have a time for a question for Kayla if there's any burning questions out there. Not seeing any in the chat or hands, but please do follow up in the chat if you have any. And I see John's come on, so I'll turn it over to Whatcom County.
Okay, so I'm John Thompson with Whatcom County Public Works. Hopefully, I'm working from home today because I'm sick, so hopefully the tree chipper next door won't start up. So with this grant, the Bridge and Hydraulic and the Natural Resource Divisions of Whatcom County Public Works, we've teamed up to form our Fish Passage program. Our key partners in this are the salmon co-managers, which in this case is Nooksack Indian Tribe and Lummi Nation and DFW. But we also work very closely with the city of Bellingham and the small cities within Whatcom County. And then the Whatcom Conservation District and Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association are also very key players in this. And, finally, we do coordinate with WashDOT and Department of Natural Resources also. The project goals for this project, which is redundant, is to build staff capacity in our fish passage program. So leveraging the grant funds and local funds to kind of build out our staff. The goal is to create a strategic conveyor belt of county projects in all phases of development, and work with the co-managers in particular to target priority species and geographic areas to help achieve YRO1 salmon recovery goals. Our accomplishments in 2024 is we did hire a fish biologist, Priscilla was on earlier, and then an engineer in bridge and hydraulics. And then that gives us extra kind of technical know-how to do assessment and design. And then we're also providing local funds to support both tribes and their, basically their participation and help with this. In March of 24, we hosted 2 sessions of training for fish passage and habitat assessment. DFW staff led that. We had over 35 Whatcom County and local partner staff members attend that. And the desired outcome with that is to build our local kind of technical expertise so we can assess and measure effectiveness of our projects. We updated our 4-year culvert work plan, which is we coordinate across basically anybody that's working on culverts to restore fish passage in the basin. And then we initiated the design process for the Black Slough area in the South Fork Nooksack. So the outcomes anticipated for 25, we want to get that engineering tech on board within bridge and hydraulics. We plan on completing preliminary designs for 5 to 6 Black Slough area culverts, and then we'll get final designs by year end on a subset to be determined. This wasn't technically part of this grant, but the staff capacity is assisting it. We're going to construct the Kenny Creek project, which is I can't see the slide, but it's that culvert in the image. So we're going to replace that 5-foot pipe and a fish ladder that doesn't work with a 115-foot bridge starting in June. And so the capacity provided by these staffing is helping us do that. And then again, kind of with the staff capacity, we're going to begin site assessment and alternatives analysis and preliminary design on 11 sites under an AOP grant. So we didn't really ask about challenges, but like everybody else, the unstable funding strings at multiple levels is posing a challenge. We want to be able to get our preliminary designs done and then get construction money to build the things. So that's it.
Great. Thanks so much for that update, John. Really appreciate you highlighting how you're leveraging and bridging across a number of different funding sources and capacity. So really appreciate you sharing that update. And I encourage folks who have any questions for John to put them in the chat or follow-up opportunities. And we'll keep going. So I'm going to turn it over now to University of Washington, Jason Toft.
Thanks, Jennifer. I am Jason of the Tofts here at UW, representing the Shoreline Monitoring Database. So thank you to the HSIL great group of people for funding this and for everyone for being here. So who are we? I'm here at UW at the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, and Washington Sea Grant is at, well, kind of here across the street. So Kate Lytle and others. And then we have some great nonprofits who are really also good about organizing community scientists. So Vashon Nature Center, Northwest Straits Foundation, and Sound Data Science. So that's who we are. What are we doing, you might ask? So over the years, we've developed this group of protocols that we started out calling the Shoreline Monitoring Toolbox. So this was a way to get standardized protocols to monitor Puget Sound shorelines and get them into the hands of anyone who wanted them. Oftentimes, community science groups need this kind of training and information so they can collect data on their beaches. And so at this point, we have database features with a lot of those protocols. So This batch of funding will be developing more database features, improving the website, and again, gearing this towards assessing, a lot of it is assessing effectiveness of shoreline restoration is one main goal. So I'll talk more about kind of our plans for the future and where we're at. One of the goals is to add 3 new protocols to the website. So if you have a favorite protocol that does not have database features, you can send it my way. We have a short list of 3 that are exciting. One is fish predator surveys, so looking at birds and seals, otters, whatever else is around before one does a fish survey. Scouting out human dimensions and how a human dimension protocol could be used and incorporated into the database, and also work with trail cams. Again, putting these out at different beaches and generating data. So those are protocols we hope to add. We have a grad student, Morgan Arrington, who has started up. She had her first committee meeting this morning, which is exciting. And things we hope to do in the future with analyzing the data. We're collecting, and we're also doing a lot of field work. We sample at 28 shoreline restoration sites. So we'll be going out this summer and doing that. And at this point, we have a pretty broad spatial and temporal coverage that we're collecting data at. And so the hope is to look at some things that one can basically ask this data set when it's to this extent. So things such as timeline since restoration, if we can think about optimizing, monitoring, and how often one may need to do it to get an answer. That's one thing we're looking into. Also hoping to get more landscape features into the data analysis. Some that are just kind of like urban landscape features. Some we've talked to Ian Miller a bit, I guess, who's next, about kind of the sea level rise parcel scale data, and if there's a way we could incorporate that into our data analysis, again, for these shoreline restoration sites. So lots going on. I'll stop there, and excited for what's coming up.
Thanks so much, Jason. And if there's a very quick question for Jason, please let us know. Anything's coming in the chat, but that wasn't for Jason. All right. Well, you know where to find Jason in the chat for more. And we'll keep moving and turn over to Ian with Washington Sea Grant.
Yeah, thank you. I am Ian Miller, Coastal Hazards Specialist with Washington Sea Grant, and gonna sort of try to briefly describe this HSIL supported project that is titled Parcel Scale Sea Level Rise Vulnerability for Puget Sound Phase 2. This project, the project team is composed of Washington Sea Grant, myself, and then we have support from Coastal Geologic Services, which is now part of Natural Systems Design, and then Sound Data Science. And then our advisory group includes representatives from Washington's Emergency Management Department, Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Health, Department of Natural Resources, plus representatives from NOAA and Western Washington University. So the project goals for this, so there's a couple goals written on there. I'm going to try to be a little bit broader. Basically, we're trying to use spatial data and analysis approaches to assess, map, and rank vulnerabilities associated with sea level rise across Puget Sound. And so really kind of more simply put, we're just trying to identify those parcels that will be impacted first and most as sea level rises, with the hopes that that can lead to something associated with those parcels. We don't get quite into what that something is, but at least the identification of them is a first phase. Another major goal of this second phase of the project is to make our results easily accessible to potential users. This is the second phase of this project, the first of which we conducted between 2020 and 2022. And I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat afterwards from that first phase that you can use to sort of dive more deeply into the project, the overall approach, and that kind of thing. So in regards to accomplishments thus far, we've really been focusing recently on updating our analysis with a focus on what we call exposure. So basically trying to evaluate where future coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and groundwater emergence will occur on the landscape. And then we've also just launched a tribal engagement process that's going to be oriented towards seeking consent to publish our results that fall on tribal lands. And then in terms of looking forward, what are we hoping to accomplish in the coming year? We're hoping to move on to framing and analyzing what we call sensitivity. This is basically trying to collect data about the values on the landscape, roads, buildings, agricultural lands, habitats, really anything that we can incorporate that may be impacted by those hazards that are exacerbated by sea level rise. And then we're also hoping to start work on that really major focus of our project on communication. So building out an interactive tool that allows users to access and play with the results, change weights, change or include or exclude different components, and then map the results for their area of interest. So we will hopefully get started on that in this coming year.
Thanks so much, Ian. Any quick questions for Ian? Kelly.
Yeah, I have a question, Ian. I'm wondering, when you guys have done some of this work and you're looking at it's mostly from the perspective of like critical infrastructure and residential properties, and I know you said habitat, is there any either part of your work or future scope or future phases that you guys are thinking about in terms of like where the water can go? You know, like blue space and blue zones and where the water can flow, or we might want it to go, where relocation of homes might be a really good idea because you can provide, because if you have like functional habitat and ecosystem services in those spaces, you know, versus areas where like it's just so much hard infrastructure, there's no going anywhere. I mean, I'm just wondering, like in your mapping, is that something that's been that's in the mix or has been done, or you are doing this? Is that part of this? I don't know.
Well, I think that, like obviously our focus is on saying where is vulnerable, and that's an interaction of, again, things we care about that can be infrastructure, it can be habitats, with these hazards. But you could also easily configure the data we're compiling to sort of look at kind of the opposite, which is where are places that are expected to be impacted by those hazards that are not currently developed, right? You could make, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like you could make that kind of inquiry and use it to sort of ask the questions like, where are places that we may want to try to work to keep undeveloped because they will be, if we don't, they'll cause future problems. And there are also places where future coastal water will go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm sure like you can also look at it like where it's undeveloped, but like just less developed. There's like,
Yeah.
I'm seeing a big conversation growing where you both and others can head to your happy hour of choice afterwards for that. Thanks so much for that really great question, Kelly, and sparking that concept. And I look forward to hearing where it goes. I'm going to keep us moving though with another Washington Sea Grant presentation. So Emily, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks for the chance to share a snippet on the award to protect coastal habitats through European green crab early detection, monitoring, and management support. We've been really lucky to have the HSIL support both currently and in the past. I'm Emily Grayson. I'm a marine ecologist at Washington Sea Grant and the program lead for Washington Sea Grant Crab Team, which is now entering its 11th season, hosting a citizen science model of early detection and monitoring as a network for European green crab, but also for pocket estuary fauna. This year, the network will again have 57 sites across Washington's portion of the Salish Sea, and that is only possible through partnership with about 200 individual community member volunteers, as well as contributed participation by staff at partner organizations, including Stillaguamish, Swinomish, Lower Elwha, Port Gamble, Jamestown, Slalom, and Samish tribes. Also partners from Wildlife Refuges, State DNR, Ecology, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in addition, the program supports statewide management through scientific advising of a lot of the partners and managers who work on the issue, building technical capacity through partner trapper training workshops, and hosting an annual Trappers Summit that enables the people in the mud to share, get out of the mud, and then share observations and best practices horizontally across practitioners at state, federal agencies, tribes, shellfish growers, and so forth. Both the early detection and the monitoring function of the crab team monitoring network, which is at the core of the program, continue to be really important to the state in managing the globally damaging invader, which can, as the crab continues to expand its range south into Puget Sound and Hood Canal, with recent new detections, relatively new in the north end of Hood Canal and Admiralty Inlet. And the network also tracks populations of green crabs alongside potentially impacted native species in places where green crabs have already been found and are actively being managed by partners. This past year, we're particularly proud that we can reflect on having rounded our 10-year mark in our pocket estuary monitoring data set, which more or less unofficially classifies us as a long-term ecological monitoring project. We celebrated with participants at an event we called Crab Stock, and that included those who were with us at our very first training event and are still in the mud with us now, so long later. 2024 was also our first full implementation for the newly launched Molt Search program, which is sort of a spin-off. It's a collaborative effort with WSU Extension that adapts a piece of the crab team network sampling approach to enable a much broader swath of beachgoers to support the early detection of green crab, as well as research questions on Dungeness crab fishery. As of today, we have nearly 970 Molt Search surveys conducted. We're rapidly closing in on that 1,000 mark. And we're excited to build on these successes, including repeating what will now be an annual Salish Sea-wide Molt Search Blitz, which will happen on summer solstice. So feel free to reach out and connect with us if that's something that sounds exciting to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily, for all those updates, and save the date for solstice, everyone. If you have any questions for Emily, please, and follow-ups, please put them in the chat. We're going to keep going and bring up Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Lenhart, and I'm a nearshore ecologist with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources Nearshore Habitat Program. And today I'll be updating you all on our project, identifying factors associated with patterns in floating kelp loss and resilience through coordinated monitoring and research. This project is led by DNR in close collaboration with University of Washington and University of Chicago. The goal of this project is to examine bull kelp declines in the Salish Sea from a systematic perspective and over a large spatial scale. To accomplish this, we conducted coordinated monitoring efforts at 15 distinct sites with contrasting kelp status. And these sites are shown on the map here. These sites were chosen because they exhibit a wide range of environmental conditions and include bull kelp beds that are either declining, lost, or displaying resilience. Our partners on this work are University of Washington, University of Chicago, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Samish Indian Nation, Reef Check, Puget Sound Restoration Fund, Northwest Straits Commission, and Marine Agronomics. This is a truly collaborative project that would not have been possible without the expertise and support of our many partners. It's truly been a group effort, and we couldn't have done it without everyone's help. Two accomplishments from the past year that I would like to highlight Our first, we completed a year-long field effort. So an entire year of data was collected, including summer kelp canopy surveys and tissue sample collection, which was led by DNR and University of Chicago. Benthic dive surveys led by University of Washington, and then monthly environmental water sampling and continuous sensor deployment and retrieval, also led by DNR and University of Washington. And then secondly, our second accomplishment, we have begun our initial data QA/QC process, which we will continue over the next few months as we move more into the data analysis portion of this project. And then in the coming year, we plan to finalize our synthesis report of existing data, which includes existing data sets on kelp canopy, benthic, and environmental data. And we are also planning to produce an initial draft of our technical report this summer, which we will use to inform recommendations for future monitoring and research efforts. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that update. Are there any questions before we move on? Giving folks a moment late in the afternoon. All righty. Well, please do put them in the chat if you have them. Thank you so much again. We're going to head into our last, but certainly not least, lightning talk, followed by a final deep dive. So hand it over to the Seattle Aquarium.
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Excellent. All right, so hello, folks. My name is Zachary Randell. I'm a research scientist at the Seattle Aquarium, and I'm working this project using ROVs and divers to investigate the methods that we've developed. So in short, we've developed some methods of using small, inexpensive, maneuverable, and customizable ROVs to go into kelp forests and gather downward-facing imagery and forward-facing imagery in order to help map out the seafloor and life along the seafloor. I think the core essence of the HSIL project is investigating how best to integrate these new methods into the broader suite of coastal monitoring efforts in Washington, especially when thinking about helping to guide bull kelp conservation and restoration. So on this project, we're partnered with Puget Sound Restoration Fund, with whom we're flying our ROV at their Jefferson Head bull kelp enhancement site. Reef Check, who's helped train some of our Seattle Aquarium scientific divers for the diver portion of the data collection here. And Samish DNR were kind enough to provide vessel support last summer up in the San Juan Islands. Also, shout out to Port of Seattle. We're leveraging both projects, the HSIL project and the Urban Kelp Research Project with the port to help train our machine learning algorithms, for example. So using HSIL data and port data to train both of those. So the main tiers of this project, we have the ROV diver methods comparison, and this is one of our accomplishments of this past year. We completed these surveys both in Elliott Bay and up in the San Juan Islands. So these are divers going down, laying out transect tapes, then collecting the diver data and ROV data along the same exact transects on the same days. Image processing and data analyses are underway now. Another tier of the project is how best to integrate the ROV surveys into bull kelp restoration monitoring. So this has been a bit of a challenge. The ROV can do site surveys really well, but you have to pick your season. And when the water is dark and green and turbid in the midst of the summer algal blooms, it's just not the best tool. So it's definitely going to be an area where you're going to want to stick with a diver if you're doing fine scale tactile tasks like counting bull kelp stipes. And then the third tier, updating the bull kelp habitat suitability model. So we've made really good progress on this. Gray McKenna started a bull kelp site selection tool in ArcGIS, and we have expanded upon it. We've revamped the underlying statistical structure of that model and added new layers as well as refreshed some layers. So we're pleased with the progress there, and we're going to continue developing that in the future. Two final quick shout out. So we've revamped our camera and lighting settings over the past year of the ROV, and so we're now able to gather high resolution photographic imagery at the seafloor. And this is working really well with our machine learning algorithms. I think in particular, the ROV surveys could be really useful going forward for the state when thinking about how to capture and quantify understory vegetation. We have a lot of resources on GitHub. We're trying to make as much information open access as possible, so feel free to access that QR code. And lastly, we're pretty excited with where these machine learning algorithms are at. We're using a tool called CoralNet Toolbox, and we've been able to basically train an accuracy of 91.5% for the overall model accuracy. So I think I will leave it at that. Thank you, HSIL, very much for your funding and support with this work.
Thanks so much, Zach. Really appreciate that update. I see there's a question in the chat that we don't have time to address, so I'd love it if you'd be willing to answer Tynan's question in the chat, Zach. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jody Toft at Puget Sound Restoration Fund to close us out on a deep dive. Jody, I'll try and give you a warning at around 10 minutes, and Juliana, I'll have the timer up for 13 minutes. So take it away, Jody.
Great, thanks. Let me do a sound check. How am I coming through? Great. Okay, Jennifer has done a great job forcing you to try to get your coffee and chocolate, which most of us didn't do. So I'm just going to come at you with rampant enthusiasm about kelp and see if that can get you through the 3:45 to 4 p.m. time slot here. Let's go. So it's always great to follow other kelp talks because they've set the stage really nicely for what I'm going to talk about, which is kelp restoration. But before I even jump into this, it is totally appropriate to say a huge thank you to HSIL for this transformative funding. Having a 4-year project where we can really take the time to build out the work, learn from what we're doing, pivot, change, adapt, and do over 4 years is just something that doesn't happen that often for this type of work. And I'm really pleased that the CIAT and HSIL designed this funding call to cover such a long period of time. It's really helpful. So thank you. Thank you. All right, go ahead and click it. We'll see where we're at. Summary, such a long summary. The summary of our project, which is strengthening restoration tools for rebuilding kelp beds in Puget Sound, is as follows. We are doing this work to strengthen bull kelp restoration practices by deploying tested strategies across a broader range of restoration sites to identify the environmental conditions and variety of seed sources that lead to the highest rates of successful restoration. The TLDR here is we've got a tool that works pretty well for kelp restoration in one place, but it's really important to figure out how well that tool works in different places, anticipating that we'll need to deploy that tool in different places with different environmental conditions. Okay, that's your TLDR. You can Google that if you aren't young like me. So here we go. When I'm talking about kelp, I'm actually really talking about bull kelp. So here in the Southern Salish Sea, we are in a biodiversity hotspot for kelp, which is awesome, go us. But the canopy forming kelp that I'm talking about is Nereocystis luciana. So it's shown here in the arrow. Hillary Hayford from our team is modeling this. She leads a lot of this work and does a great job doing so. But this is our forest builder. So this is the one species within Puget Sound itself that starts at the seafloor and moves all the way up to the sea surface. And it does that each year. And with that forest that it builds with that structure that it builds comes the fish, the marine invertebrates, and all of the kind of life around it. And so sometimes we think of this as just the armature of the marine environment, this marine forest that comes and goes each year and brings with it all of the benefits that are associated with our marine forests. Next slide. So status, not like social status, really, this is just sort of the floating kelp, how's it doing status. And so this is a great piece of work that has come together over the last couple of years for the floating kelp indicator for Washington State. And so this is tied to the Puget Sound Partnership's marine vegetation vital sign. And what we're seeing here is that, without going into this in too much detail, you're sort of seeing skittles here, right? You're seeing a lot of different colors smattered over Washington State. So in some areas, you might like the red skittles the most, as I do, but that's bad. We don't want red skittles. And red skittles in central Puget Sound and south Puget Sound indicate that we've seen a lot of kelp loss in that area. There's a whole other chunk of work here, which DNR is leading, which I just talked about, which really digs into that decline. If you like blue skittles, which probably aren't a thing, that just means we don't have enough information about bull kelp in those areas. And then for some of these other colors, like in the Strait of Juan de Fuca and out as we get along the northern part of the Pacific coast, we actually have kelp beds, which taken in aggregate are pretty stable. So we've got kind of a different story for bull kelp in different areas. And I think it's important to kind of level that playing field here for the group. And thank you. Oh, good. Glad to know blue skittles are totally a thing. Thank you. Moving ahead. So getting onto our project, what are we doing? Our 4 objectives here are as listed. So we're outplanting seeded kelp lines at 4 restoration sites, monitoring the kelp performance, environmental conditions, and ecological community structures, comparing seed sources, data collection methods, and conditions at restored versus wild kelp beds, and creating the communications materials for restoration practitioners. As is the case for all of the projects we've heard about today, and certainly for the kelp projects we just heard about, this work is done by many, and we're very fortunate to have a really deep bench here and a great on-court team. I'm not sure where I'm going in on so many different metaphors today, but it is what's happening. So Samish Indian Nation, Squaxin Island Tribe, Suquamish Tribe, DNR, Port of Seattle, Reef Check, Nature Conservancy, Marine Agronomics, Seattle University, Seattle Aquarium, sorry, Zach, and University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee are all project partners on this. Let's keep going. So where are we doing this work and over what and what are we doing each year? So we've got actually 4 areas in which we're doing the work. I'll move from the strait over to the east. So in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, we have 2 sites where we have a restoration site and a wild site. The restoration site is where we're outplanting kelp. The wild site is where kelp already exists. So it is our reference site. So reference site in the Strait of Juan de Fuca is Freshwater Bay, and then I flipped that. Our wild site is Freshwater Bay, and our restoration site is Morse Creek by Port Angeles. In the San Juan Islands, we're working with Samish Indian Nation, and we're identifying where that site should be and are actively working on what permits we need to get, with the quirky caveat of, boy, is it going to be tough to get a federal permit in this new landscape because they're not going to have anybody there to review the federal permits that we're going to need. Just a little flag for people who aren't thinking about that. And if so, are we going to have to come up with some creative strategies for deploying seeded kelp line underground, looking for glacial erratics? That's on your to-do list. If it's not on your to-do list, it's on ours, because these are the types of things that we need to be doing for contingency planning. So San Juan Islands will have an outplant site up there, and we're scoping that. And then Burroughs Light is our reference site. And we move down into Central Sound, and our restoration site is a place we've been working at for several years. It's really the place where we built our technique. It's in Suquamish waters in a site called Duquaguats, which is right by Indianola, near Jefferson Head. And then our reference site is in Elliott Bay, where there are some pretty good reference beds. And then in South Sound, our reference site is the same as our restoration site, and that's at Squaxin Island. And then over the years, we have different restoration treatments that are going in each year as we build out those projects and learn year over year what's working. Next slide, please. So a couple of things that I wanted to pop the hood on here. Now we're talking about cars after Skittles and other things. Why not? So how do we do this work? To create kelp seed, first we need to do that work in our kelp lab. So this is the kelp lab that we operate at NOAA's Manchester Research Station. We hope that doesn't shudder for any reason. Just want to be, I think it's good to call out the elephants in the room here. So this is really important work that we do. This is where we have a biobank for kelp seed. So we have samples from 23 kelp populations throughout the Southern Salish Sea. Those are distinct kelp populations that we keep males and females of in stasis. We hold on to them, and then when we change the light conditions and the temperature, then we wake them up. We can encourage them to reproduce, and then from there, once they've reproduced, we can grow kelp seed. So you're seeing some photos of the kelp seed bank itself, the germplasm bank, or the gametophyte bank, as we call it, as well as some of the processes that we use to do wild sporulation. So we grow seed a couple of different ways. But at the end of the day, it ends up on these spools that you're seeing on the image on the right, on nylon twine. And then that's the way that we reintroduce the kelp back into the marine ecosystem. Next slide. And so I'm showing you a couple different ways. The way that we've been using the most is by anchoring a long line on the seafloor and then unfurling that seeded twine. So you can see that brown fuzz on the spool. That's actually really tiny little sporophytes. It's baby kelp that just look like brown fuzz. And we shuttle that along the seafloor. And then from there, next slide. The kelp grows up into a beautiful kelp curtain. Here you can see the bulbs on the bull kelp, pretty dense bull kelp, and it grows to the surface. And this is a practice that we've had underway in central Puget Sound, where we've been able to successfully bring that kelp curtain back each year from seafloor to surface in an area where the kelp has been absent since about the 80s or the 90s. So that's exciting. Next slide. And that's what it looks like on the surface. Next slide. Let's try to click this and see if it works. All right, and so this right now, this is the work at Morse Creek, the deployment there, which took place just a few weeks ago. And so here, what we're doing is we have 8-gallon bucket cement molds that we've made. You can see that in the background there, where the diver is getting that ready and tagging it. So instead of securing that long line to the seafloor, we're trying out this different method where we have the twine that you can see in the foreground with the little baby kelps on it, looking a little different from the other one. It's fallen over. Uh-oh, someone better pick it up. But then what we do is we'll wrap that twine around these smaller kind of cement plugs that we put down on the seafloor. It's a lower permitting burden, but there is still a permitting burden, and it's a method in which we can kind of more easily deploy that kelp seed and then remove it, as we can just kind of put a hook on the cement molds and bring them out again. We're not going to watch the whole video. I'm sorry. I know you're all riveted, but you can go to the next slide. Trust me, the one that got tipped over is righted, and then it's wrapped around the cement block. And so the teams are out now monitoring that. So that's, I just want to, yeah, I see that clock. That's really helpful for me, actually, as I keep racing through this. So a few more slides here. So that's just a glimpse into the types, into how we grow the seed and how we deploy the seed. But there's also several other elements of the project. One is the environmental monitoring. So this map should look really similar to the DNR map. These are places where we have environmental monitoring buoys out with instruments. Next slide. And those instruments are stacks of instruments that are measuring environmental conditions near the seafloor and at the surface, so that we can get information on what's going on in these kelp beds and in places where there were kelp beds where there no longer are kelp beds. Next slide. And from these, just for example, we can get a glimpse into what's going on temperature-wise, where in this graph, we're showing that, we've got a little bit of a problem because it's 16 degrees C and above. We know that there's stress to kelp that can be really deleterious, and that's what we want to avoid. But getting a glimpse into what some of these temperature conditions look like is what we'll be working on as soon as we bring somebody new onto the team. We're actively hiring somebody who will be our data master and cranker so that we can make good sense of all the data that are coming from these monitoring sites. Next slide. And just for example, what we can see in this graph without going into much detail is comparing year to year, looking at sea surface temperature, looking at the surface temperatures from some of this monitoring equipment. You can see that the kelp we're experiencing a lot more heat cumulatively in 2024 than in 2023. And we can pair that with observations on fecundity, on reproduction, on kind of persistence of the kelp bed, and see how that fared for restoration versus wild bed. Darn it, always over on time. So there's a couple core questions. I'll just take 30 seconds here, Jennifer. As we're moving forward to compare these different data types, we have lots of questions that we're working to answer, outplant to wild beds. How do they compare when we look at the fecundity? Do they stay fecund for a long period of time for the restoration sites versus the wild sites? Do they have a similar biological community that's associated with them? Do we see recruitments year over year that are coming from the restoration outplants? In short, we're seeing those at our outplant site in Central Sound. We want to see those elsewhere as well. And then do we see over the 4-year period that we're seeing that restoration flywheel has begun? I think you can probably forward. Keep going. Oh, you're intrigued, but we're not going to look at those. We've done a lot of things. Keep going. We had a great help knowledge exchange. Thank you to all those who participated. Very good. Outreach is not something we're too worried about getting done. We do love to talk about what we're doing. Last slide. My last thing that I just want to pause on is this is a great place to do this work. Again, we're thankful, and I try to keep a little perspective in these kind of really, really weird times. We're really lucky to do this work in this place, and I just want to say thanks.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Yeah.
Well, your passion and enthusiasm for kelp carried me through to the end, so I hope that it carried everybody else through. And even though I'm not a Skittles fan, I even thought about maybe would I want a Skittles to keep it to the end. And Mitch has some questions in the chat, which if there is time for you to address there, great. And if that's a follow-up email, encourage that as well. Wow. Well, I hope everyone else's brains are fully saturated and that you go home and you talk to your housemates, significant others, children, and share something you learned today, or go back to your colleagues in the office tomorrow and share at least one awesome and cool thing you heard out of all these presentations, because there is just an incredible amount of work. And if you think about it, this is just such a small amount of work of what's happening in Puget Sound. HSIL funding, we think is important, but it's really only one part of the big puzzle. And so I hope you can take away that, wow, just with this 3 hours, there's just so much more happening, and we should all be really proud of, the dedication, critical thinking, innovation, and passion you're all bringing to this work. I want to thank everyone. So thank you to our subrecipients. Thank you to all our partners and advisory team who joined today. And we hope that you continue to connect with you, and we connect with you, and you connect with each other. Before you hop off, we have 28 additional awards that are being finalized from our 2024 RFP. So we're really looking forward to next year being able to bring together the full suite of HSIL-funded work. And we're thinking about how to do that, because I don't think anybody can stick through that many lightning talks. Additionally, for those of you who are the marine vegetation cheerleaders and champions, Bree Turner is our lead for marine vegetation, is going to put some links in the chat now about our end of April workshops on April 23rd and 24th to get feedback on the draft implementation strategy work that's building from and synthesizing existing planning efforts. Additionally, there's some QR codes on the screen. We'll be sharing this recording via the WDFW YouTube and channel and HSIL's playlist there. And please, to stay up to date on HSIL, as well as the Shellfish and Stormwater Strategic Initiative leads for events, funding, and products, please do sign up for the SIL Gov Delivery distribution list. Julianne's putting all the links in the chat. The link for that Gov delivery list will go to the Department of Ecology. You won't see SILs on that screen, but it is specifically for the strategic initiative leads. So we encourage you to get direct information from us, as well as check out other information on the HSIL and all those cool videos on the HSIL YouTube playlist, just in case you need a little fun at any point in time during your workday. So with that, just again, huge thank you. Really appreciate all of you being here and sharing your work, and hoping to keep hearing about these successes and seeing them come to fruition over the next few years. Thanks, everybody.